Alright, so what exactly is AWS CDK? Now, before we can talk about that, we should first mention CloudFormation because CloudFormation is a very important part that allows CDK to work the way that it does. And all CloudFormation is a service that allows you to define a CloudFormation template in either JSON or YAML. Now, in this template is going to be the definition of the necessary AWS resources that you want created and the configuration of those resources. So basically, AWS will treat this template as a blueprint. So you're going to pass this template over to AWS. AWS is going to say, okay, let me first make sure that this is actually something that I can do. Once it makes sure that this is a valid ask of AWS, it's going to go ahead and translate that template into the necessary resources and the configuration of those resources. So what are the benefits of using CloudFormation? Well, as you might already imagine, is that you're able to automate by creating infrastructure using code, right? You no longer have to go into the console and create every single resource and configure it in the console, which is very monotonous, repetitive, and error prone. You're able to simplify the creation and provisioning of resources and the management of that infrastructure in one template. And there's also a speed and reusability aspect because you're able to, reuse different templates. There's thousands of these templates online for different infrastructure, so you can take those or you can reuse your old ones, update small details in those templates. And so it's definitely more productive for developing and creating infrastructure. You're also able to control and track changes because this is code now, right? So you can commit this to GitHub, for example, or any other CI or CD workflow, and you're able to make sure that all the changes to your infrastructure are actually tracked, and you can even roll back to these changes. There's, of course, way more benefits, but these are the main ones that I wanted to talk about in this slide. Well, a lot of you might say, CloudFormation sounds great. What does CDK do differently? Well, CDK actually takes CloudFormation a step further because it allows you to define the necessary AWS resources using your favorite programming language. So basically, you're able to define a CDK application using languages like TypeScript, JavaScript, Java, or Python. And inside of that application, you're going to have one or more stacks. And a stack is a concept that is actually originally from CloudFormation and is basically just a deployment unit. So it's a unit that's going to have a bunch of resources that you think should belong in this one unit together. So basically, different parts of your infrastructure might be made of different stacks. So in this case, though, in CDK, a stack is going to be made up of constructs. And a construct is actually just a cloud component. And a cloud component really means either a single resource, like maybe just an S3 bucket, or a higher level component that is made up of multiple resources that are basically somehow related or coupled together. So in this case, we have a construct that has Lambda function as well as an SQS service. And in this case, we have a DynamoDB and an S3 bucket put together in one construct. So once you've created your CDK application, you're essentially going to have CDK automatically generate a CloudFormation template for you using your CDK infrastructure code. And then it's going to basically translate that CloudFormation template into AWS resources just like CloudFormation does by itself. To further emphasize to you guys just how easy and convenient it is to use CDK to create resources, let's take a look at an example from the CDK docs. So basically, if you want to create a Fargate service, and you don't need to fully understand the details of this service and even this code, but if you can take a look here and see that, okay, we're creating a stack, and inside of this, we're essentially creating or constructing a VPC. We're also constructing an ECS cluster, as well as a Fargate service that is load balanced and that is public, right? So it's just a few lines of code with a few properties and configuration, right? Looks simple enough. Now, if you take a look at the CloudFormation example, where we essentially try to generate the same ECS resource, you can notice something very interesting. And so this is the GitHub for the AWS CDK, and you'll notice that for the same ECS, resource, it's actually 516 lines long, right? It's extremely verbose, and it's not something that you want to look at or yet alone create or update or maintain, right? Now, of course, I'm sure that, some of this stuff could have defaults, but the idea is that CloudFormation is definitely more verbose than CDK, and CDK is definitely more easier to work with. It's definitely more scalable and more maintainable, if you think about it from a code perspective, right? And one of the reasons that this is actually possible is because AWS provides us with constructs that they export from their library, right? So basically you're able to import constructs like this VPC construct, this cluster construct, or this application load balance Fargate service, right? And so inside of this, you can define properties like common properties like the cluster that you've created up here, the CPU, other properties that you want, or you can stick with a default, right? So you can stick with the defaults if you don't want. And the idea is that this construct in turn probably has a lot of other resources that are generated as part of this higher level construct. So this kind of abstracts a lot of the different resources and components that are needed to make this one construct work. So instead of creating something that looks like the CloudFormation template, you can just utilize these constructs, or actually combine these constructs and create your own construct, as we will see later in the course. But the idea is that AWS CDK has made it very easy for us to create the necessary infrastructure while abstracting the details that we don't need. But it is very flexible such that if we do need to actually change any details or configuration, it is extremely easy to do so. So if you look beyond that, you can see that additional benefits of using CDK include the ability to actually use programming logic like if-else statements and object-oriented programming and design. So in turn, you're able to create more reusable and extensible CDK applications and libraries to model your infrastructure. So you're also able to do things like testing, since now you're actually writing TypeScript or Java or other languages code. And you're also able to do things we talked about before, like able to, check in your code for code reviews, being able to actually keep track of all your changes and have that accountability and management of all the infrastructure and all the changes to the infrastructure. So really, you're able to leverage the full power of infrastructure as code and make deploying, maintaining, and updating infrastructure much more enjoyable and scalable.